Senate Resolution 88 by Senator Eggman, and relative to Harvey Milk Day.
Senator Eggman.
Good morning, members. I rise today on behalf of the LGBT caucus to speak on this resolution, SR 88, in honor of Harvey Milk Day. Harvey Milk, his birthday was on the 22nd of May, so we've missed it by a few days, but it's never too late to celebrate an icon. Harvey Milk was an icon in the LGBT community. He moved from New York, so like maybe a colleague on our floor, a Jewish guy from the East Coast who decided to come to California, to come to San Francisco, because that's where you could be free. This was in the 70s, folks. Think back to the 70s and what was going on then. And at that time, we had never had an openly LGBTQ person run for office, perhaps run, but never been elected. So when he came to San Francisco, at the height of the LGBT, the Mission District, the Castro was booming, and really started organizing. One of the first examples we can see that really organized in a way that brought different coalitions together based on some of the early work of the farm worker movement or the black rights, the civil rights, the women's rights. They all started in the same kind of way, building those coalitions, building coalitions with people different from you, but focusing on things that we could all agree on. As someone who owns a dog and walks a dog and lives in a neighborhood, I know what it's like to step in something that somebody else's pet left. That was one of his things he campaigned on in the beginning. Like, let's pick it up. And it became resounded with people because it mattered to people. He had a whole campaign of trying to talk to people where they lived, who they were, and how we could all come together. He was also, as I was reflecting on it, one of the first that we've really seen who we have seen this reaction of this rage that comes when people different from us come into positions of power. He was successful in becoming a board of supervisor in 1977, and as you know, he was murdered, he was assassinated sitting at his desk in 1978 by a gentleman who was angry. He was a gentleman who was angry. He was a former police officer and a firefighter, couldn't quite make his living, so he got angry, and he was angry about some of the same things we fight about now, as I look to my colleague from San Francisco, about where and how we should put drug rehabs, where and how we should treat people. And like always, there's going to be pushback. He got angry, he quit. A few days later, he asked to be reinstated. He changed his mind. He was told, no, you quit. And so his rage became so big, his rage at not being able to be his full self, thought it must be the fault of somebody else, and struck out to erase the people that he held accountable for his own shortcomings and that kind of rage of blaming the other, the fear of being replaced and blaming the other. As much as we see, just this last week, as we are burying people right now who were gunned down by somebody who was angry with bullets in a grocery store. As we saw in a church this last week, people were gunned down because people were angry that they were different from them and they felt they were encroaching on their territory. In El Paso, where people were gunned down with bullets. Over and over, we see these examples of people striking out at those who are different from them. Harvey Milk made us all so proud, made us all feel like we could accomplish anything. I was in high school when he was struggling, not quite out, but being able to look to that and see what was possible, to see the power of the coalitions that he brought together that were able to get him elected and really be able to feel that beacon of hope. I don't know about you folks, but this is a hard time to be in office right now. The division bothers me. The vitriol bothers me. I truly feel like we should be public servants and try to give people hope. And that's what Harvey was about. And I know when people come up to me on the street sometimes and they say, you know, what do you think? What do you think? And sometimes I'm afraid in my own heart, right? And I think, can we do it? And I say, we're going to be okay. Yes, we're going to be okay. Because while we might disagree, we are stronger than our differences. And it is more important for us to love and to come together than to be right. And when Harvey Milk said, if a bullet should enter my brain, let that bullet break down every closet door And I like to think he didn't just mean the closets for those of us who are LGBTQ, but the closets of intolerance, the closets of exclusion, and to open those. And while those goals still aren't quite represented yet, we still have the greatest thing that any of us could ever have to fight back with. We have hope. We have, and I ended up this prayer yesterday. So on behalf of Harvey Milk Day, on behalf of the LGBT caucus, I leave to all of you, as we go forth, as we're servants, as we look for ways to inspire others to rise to their own greatness and possibilities, you have to give the people hope. Hope for a better world. Hope for a better tomorrow. Hope that all will be all right. And you, and you, and you, and you have to give the people hope. I ask you to join me in voting aye and giving the people hope and not fear on SR 88.
Thank you, Senator Eggman. Discussion and debate, Senator Skinner.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, I rise as Vice Chair of the Women's Caucus in support of SR 88. I also rise as someone who walked precincts for Harvey Milk. So I was just becoming politically active, and I volunteered in a coalition in Berkeley that had some similar values as the coalition that was backing Harvey when he ran for supervisor. And we would go across the bay. The San Francisco activists would come and walk Berkeley precincts, and we would go across the bay and walk precincts in San Francisco. Now, I don't recall meeting Tom Amiano, our former colleague, Assemblymember Amiano, at that time, though I met him just a very few years after. And our colleague, former Assemblymember Amiano, was inspired by Harvey Milk. And as a result of his, not just interactions with Milk, but just that time and the activism, Tom was the first teacher in San Francisco to be out. And he also was the first school board member. And there were lawsuits that tried to prevent Tom from teaching. But he, like Supervisor Milk, refused to be closeted. And what I was particularly impressed about Harvey Milk is that he fought to raise the voices of all communities who were underrepresented and unseen. He was not a single issue person. While he was very loud about his preference and about the rights of LGBTQ people, he also, as our colleague from Stockton pointed out, he cared about so much more and was very articulate and really strong on those issues. And as he said, rights are won only by those who make their voices heard. And because he refused to be closeted, he encouraged everyone that he knew that was LGBTQ to come out to their families and friends. And he said, I know it is hard and it will hurt them potentially, but think about how they, meaning voters, will hurt you in the voting booth if we stay closeted. I want to mention a couple of other quotes of Supervisor Milk's that give you a sense of just the breadth of this person and his leadership and his brilliance. One of his quotes is, "It takes no compromise to give people their rights. It takes no money to respect the individual. It takes no survey to remove repressions." And then the final one I would like to add is, he said, "To sit on the front steps and talk to our neighbors is infinitely more important than to huddle on the living room lounger and watch a make-believe world in not quite living color." And I think that's something we all should follow, and I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Skinner. Senator Wiener.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of SR 88. As some of you know, I had the honor of representing, when I was on the Board of Supervisors, I represented the district that Harvey Milk used to represent. So this is very personal for me. I also live a few blocks from where Harvey lived. I live a few blocks from where his camera shop was located, and I live a few blocks from the Harvey Milk Branch Library, the Harvey Milk Elementary School, and the Harvey Milk Rec Center. Harvey Milk is part of the DNA of San Francisco, and particularly of the Castro. Harvey Milk did many great things, but one of the things he did was he helped build the foundation so that people like me, and the pro tem, and the senator from Stockton, and the senator from Santa Cruz, and many others were able to run and be elected to office. He ran numerous times before he won. He ran for the Assembly, he ran for the Board of Supervisors, and the establishment continually boxed him out because they didn't want an LGBTQ person in a significant public office. They didn't know what to make of it. And so our, at the time, liberal Democrats boxed him out. And Harvey wasn't about to let that keep him down. He kept fighting, and the movement behind him kept fighting, and he eventually broke through. And then 10 months after he broke through, he got a bullet in the head because he was a gay man, because of what he stood for. And in that short period of time, he did so much work. And one of the greatest things that he did was he played a critical role defeating the Briggs Initiative. In 1978, this is just weeks before he was murdered in City Hall, he helped defeat a ballot measure in California to ban LGBTQ teachers, to require that any LGBTQ teachers be fired, to require that their allies who stood up and supported them be fired. That was California. And Harvey helped lead the effort to defeat it. And now, 44 years later, we're seeing laws being passed to ban the discussion in schools of anything relating to the LGBTQ community. Not just for K through 3, which it's been misrepresented as, for all of public schools. Literally saying you're not allowed to say anything about Harvey Milk and what he stood for, or about LGBTQ families, or about Stonewall, or anything else. So we like to think we've advanced since 1978, when Harvey had to spend time defeating the Briggs Initiative, and when Harvey took a bullet to the brain, was murdered for our community. But here we are in 2022, and it's like we're backsliding again. And I wonder, when I think about Harvey, what would Harvey say when we look about the fights that are happening now in this country with the Don't Say Gay laws and threatening to remove trans kids from their family, put them in foster care, put the parents in prison. And he would say, you know what? Just fight. Just fight and win. That's what Harvey did. That's what we need to do today. And so happy birthday, Harvey.
Thank you, Senator Wiener. Senator Laird.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of SR 88, and the Bay Area Reporter, the LGBTQ newspaper for San Francisco, has, with great glee, pointed out that I am 45 years older than the youngest member of the LGBT caucus. I was taken aback by that at first, and then I decided the best way to embrace my longevity is to point out that I'm the only member of the LGBT caucus who actually met Harvey Milk. And it's interesting because I think we on this floor talk about Martin Luther King or Cesar Chavez, or in this moment, Harvey Milk, and we forget that there was a time when they weren't lionized, when they were a person with human frailties, where they actually are remembered because they drew a line at a time that nobody else was essentially drawing that line. And as I might have mentioned last year, when the movie Milk came out, I really didn't want to go see it because I knew how it ended. I actually knew the people around him much better. And there's that legendary scene when I did go to see it, where he is riding down in the parade holding a sign, "I'm from Woodmere, New York," and I think it was one of my first parades. I was there, I saw him go by. When he did that, and he was trying to point out that everybody came from somewhere, that there were people that were gay in all cities and locations in the country, and yet they didn't feel safe there, so it had to be pointed out when they got there. And I had a surprising takeaway from seeing that movie, and it was you forget what it was like in his time. Because there was a particular scene where they had activists organized because gay bars would just be raided. The right to peaceably assemble was not respected. And they would have people on call to all rush over to a place when there might be heads being cracked or people being rousted just for peaceably assembling because they were gay. And you forget, you look at the victories that happened since then, and you forget what it was like in the moment and what he was facing. And I was trying to think of something new to say, and I remembered for those of us on the Democratic side of the aisle, there's an organization called the California Democratic Council. And it was really much more active in the earlier years. And I would go to the CDC conventions. And the Briggs Initiative qualified very early. It qualified at least a year before it was voted on in November of 1978. So the first organization in the Democratic Party that had what was called then a gay and lesbian caucus was the CDC. And Jerry Brown would not oppose the Briggs Initiative when it first qualified. So there was a huge debate in that caucus, and it was interesting. It was Harvey Milk arguing to not endorse Jerry Brown, and Mervyn Dimely, who was the lieutenant governor, arguing to endorse Jerry Brown. And Mervyn Dimely had credibility because gay behavior was illegal, and it was legalized. And when it came to this very chamber, where I'm standing right now, the vote was 20-20. It required Mervyn Dimely to fly in from somewhere and go to the podium and cast the tie-breaking vote. So he had credibility. In the end, two things happened. The caucus did not endorse Jerry Brown, but Jerry Brown came around. And before he endorsed it, and even convinced President Jimmy Carter in the week before the election to oppose the Briggs Initiative. And it was just Harvey Milk was going to draw the line and force the issue in a way that just hadn't been forced. And that started to cause the change that is the reason many of us are here today. And one of the other things he said, and the senator from Berkeley was very good in her comments about offering hope, is he talked about, he would pick a city, but frequently he picked Altoona, Pennsylvania for some reason, that there was this poor kid sitting by himself in Altoona, Pennsylvania with no hope and not thinking there was anybody else that was like him. And so I had the honor when the first of us that were elected, the first three of us that were ever openly gay mayors in the history of the United States were elected in 1983. And I was invited a few days later to speak to the 5th annual Milk Moscone Candlelight March in San Francisco. And I was able to say, we have the first returns from Altoona because many of us were stepping up because he drew the line. And yes, at that time, there were 10 or 12 out officials in the entire United States. There are more out officials in the Monterey Bay Area now than there were in the entire United States when I was elected to local office. And so it's because he drew that line. It's because he paved the way, because he let some of us know we could do it. So regardless of the human frailty or how he made the decisions that were out of the limelight, that drew the line, that led him to where he was, there's a reason we should honor him today, because he made a fundamental difference in many people's lives. And so I'm proud to rise in support of SR 88.
Thank you, Senator Laird. Senator DeRosa.
Thank you, Madam President. As chair of the Latino Caucus, I'm so proud to stand in support of SR 88 and celebrate the life and the legacy of Harvey Milk. When he became the first openly gay man elected to a prominent political office, he knew his position would come with certain danger, as he was challenging established norms, but he pressed on. He did many things, helped pass the gay rights ordinance in San Francisco and others, as my colleagues have said. He encouraged LGBTQ people to be visible in society. He forged coalitions with other peoples and other causes to fight against all forms of oppression. And this is where our story as a Latino community comes in. We were engaged in a boycott of Coors Beer. Very few people know about that, but that was my first experience with a boycott. And then came the farm workers and other kinds of boycotts, but here in California. But there was the Coors boycott. And the Coors boycott was based on the way that Latino workers were being treated by Coors. And so California was the highest consumer, the largest consumer of Coors beer. So the boycott, which started in Colorado, was especially important in California. He found out about the Coors boycott, which was being led by the Teamsters Union. The Teamsters Union and the gay community were not exactly partners and allies in any cause. But he created a relationship there. He heard about what was going on with Latino workers in Coors back in Colorado. He heard about the boycott, and he felt he had to do something about it. There was no greater contribution that anybody made to the success of the Coors boycott than Harvey Milk. Why? Because where is beer sold? And the bars in San Francisco, and the gay bars in particular, had enormous power. And he used that power, he organized them, and when he got the pushback to say, what? What are you doing with the union? What are you doing with the Teamsters of all unions? What do you care about these other things? He set it straight, that as long as there was this grave injustice and discrimination being put upon Latino workers, he was going to stand up and do something about it. So he is a hero for the Latino community. He's a hero in the labor movement. I ask for your vote.
Thank you, Senator Durazo. Senator Kamlager.
Thank you, Madam President. As Vice Chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, I rise in solidarity with the LGBTQ caucus in support of Harvey Milk Day. Harvey Milk, as stated, was the first openly gay elected official in California, serving on San Francisco's Board of Supervisors. Black LGBTQ politicians who help pave the way for many out and proud Black public servants today don't get recognized as often as openly gay white electeds because of the elevated platforms they've received in entertainment and other outlets. But for every Milk, there's a Ron Oden, who became the first openly gay Black man elected mayor in an American city, Palm Springs, in 2003. For every Oden, there's a Barbara Jordan, the first African-American woman elected to Congress from Texas. Jordan never spoke openly about being a lesbian, but spoke openly about her near 3-decade relationship with her partner. The spoken and unspoken sacrifices influenced and inspired by Harvey Milk, Ron Oden, Barbara Jordan, and more have led to a new class of Black LGBTQ public servants who are able to live their lives openly and not have their sexuality disqualify them from politics. Lori Lightfoot, the first Black openly gay woman to be the mayor of a major American city, my hometown, Chicago. Minneapolis City Council member Andrea Jenkins made history in 2017 by becoming the first openly transgender Black woman elected to office in the country. Mondaire Jones and Richie Torres both made history during the November 2020 election when they each won congressional races in New York and now serve as the first openly gay Black members of Congress. One of the newer Black and openly gay politicians, Jalen McKee Rodriguez, won his San Antonio City Council in June of 2021. So thank you, Harvey Milk, for being an inspiration to them. This list is not long, but it is critical that this population of elected people grows to ensure representation of Black LGBTQ people everywhere. I went to church on Sunday, and as it happens, the sermon was called "The Rainbow Elephant in the Room." And the sermon was about the relationship that the Black church has had with the LGBTQIA community. And what was gleaned from the sermon was that instead of focusing on someone else's life, what department in your life should be the target of God's power? So rather than questioning someone else's life and experience, focus on your own. Because every single one of us living and breathing is the recipient of God's love and power. Every single one of us living and breathing deserves it, and every single one of us is the recipient of it. I want to thank the good senators from Berkeley and Stockton for sharing Harvey Milk's quotes on hope. I would like to add one to the roster because I too am hopeful. Harvey Milk was all about hope, and he also said, "Hope will never be silent." I ask for your aye vote on SR 88.
Thank you, Senator Kamlager. Senator Pan.
Thank you, Madam President, Senators. I too rise in strong support of SR 88 as chair of the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. Probably start on maybe a little more personal note. So, of course, I have not met Harvey Milk. I appreciate the remarks from my good friend from Santa Cruz because I was a child in Western Pennsylvania when the horrific news came of the murder of Harvey Milk, and read about it in the papers, and something that happened over in the West Coast, but just what a horrific tragedy, right? And of course, I'm in socially conservative Western Pennsylvania. It sort of was in the news, and it sort of moved on. But at least when I read the story, certainly felt that something horrible really did happen. That wasn't just something that happened far off California, because when you're in Pittsburgh, California is far off, but something that really shook the nation and really was something that need to pay attention to. And I still remember reading the stories about that. But as chair of the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, I would make note that, of course, Harvey Milk was, as noted by the previous speakers, is not only a giant in the LGBTQ community, but truly a leader who brought hope and empowerment. The relationship between the API community and the LGBT community is an interesting one because actually in Asian culture, while there's certainly elements of homophobia, it's not quite the same as it is in Western culture. In fact, more of the opposition to the LGBTQ community and the Asian community actually is because those members of the Asian community have then embraced certain Western institutions which were in opposition. And it's not native to necessarily to the Asian culture. However, I would make note that in the API community, we still certainly have work to do, but there are certainly very proud of the many LGBTQ leaders in our community who continue to follow Harvey Milk's example. We have Janice Lee, who actually is the only Asian queer woman who serves elected, who serves on the BART board. We have two members of the API Legislative Caucus here, both in the Assembly, who actually are a part of the LGBTQ caucus. In fact, Assemblymember Evan Lowe is actually chair of the LGBTQ caucus, and we're very proud of their participation and look forward to additional members of the API Legislative Caucus in the future who will also be members of the LGBTQ caucus. I appreciate the remarks of my good friend from San Francisco about this push back into the closet and lack of visibility or attempted erasure. because that's certainly something the API community also continues to struggle with, the lack of visibility and unfortunately efforts by some to actually continue to erase our history, even our existence in the American narrative. And so it's so very important that that does not happen, that we continue to tell the stories, that we continue to share those stories. And while there may be some people in power in other parts of the country who would try to render us invisible and silence us, if we keep telling those stories will get through, right? Those stories will get through, just like the story of Harvey Milk and his death to a young man in Pennsylvania. So I really can't add much more to my good friend from Stockton, which he talked also about the importance of not only hope, but also to be sure that we can, continue the work that, Harvey Milk unfortunately took a bullet. But we need to be sure we continue, and we need to push back against those who would push toward extremism and violence and who want to place blame on others and then carry out that blame through violence. This is unfortunately an ongoing story that we need to continue to push back against. And so for so very many reasons, we really appreciate that we are remembering Harvey Milk today, not only, of course, as an LGBTQ leader and icon, but also as someone who stands for hope, who stands for the best of America. And so with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote on SR 88, which I also make note in Chinese culture is a very lucky number. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pan. Members, any further discussion or debate? Seeing and hearing none, Senator Eggman, you may close.
Thank you very much, and thank all the members for their comments today. Harvey Milk said, "You can't keep freedom under a closet door. It just won't work." And we also know, it should also be noted, that the person who murdered him only received 7 years and was out in 5. That same travesty of juries not quite getting it right because times are different. But that doesn't mean, right, that we don't keep going. Harvey Milk also said, "I am tired of the conspiracy of silence, and I'm going to talk about it, and I want you to talk about it." Everybody, let's keep talking about the ultimate freedom, the freedom to love who you want, the freedom to be who you want, the freedom to serve, the freedom to live where you want, the freedom to have the jobs that you want, the basic freedoms of life. If you can't love and be who you are, then we really have no freedoms at all. And I ask for your yes vote on SR 88.
Thank you, Senator Eggman. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen, Archuleta, Atkins, Bates, Becker, I. Borges, I. Bradford, I. Caballero, Cortese, I. Dowley, Dodd, I. Durazo, I. Eggman, I. Glazer, I. Gonzalez, I. Grove, I. Hertzberg, Wesso, I. Hurtado, I. Jones, I. Kamlager, I. Laird, I. Leyva, I. Limon, I. McGuire, I. Melendez, I. Min, I. Newman, I. Nielsen, Ochoa Bogue, I. Pan, I. Portantino, I. Roth, I. Rubio, I. Skinner, I. Stern, I. Umberg, I. Wachowski, I. Wiener, I. Wilk.
Please call the absent members.
Allen, Archuleta, Atkins, Bates, I. Caballero, Dowley, Hertzberg, Nielsen, Wilk.
Ayes 32, no 0. The resolution is adopted.